We've got a new trade deal with China. Is it going to make a difference to you? You're watching TechStrong Gang. Hey everyone, welcome to TechStrong Gang. Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend. You know, the big news on Friday was that a trade deal. Well, the president of the U.S. announced that he had a trade deal done with China. Lo and behold, the Chinese actually confirmed that there was some sort of deal done. We're going to get into the particulars of it. I know when I read it, I don't know, it was a little less than I was expecting. But Mike, am I unrealistic in my hopes? What's going on?
Well, as is always the case with these things, the devil's in the details, and we'll see how the details emerge, hopefully over the coming week. But it would appear that China is not going to try to hold its rare earth metals as hostage anymore, and we in turn are going to tone down the tariffs on the technology products, which is the part of this thing I think we care about most. But let's start with Stacy on this one, because it's as much about the psychology of the deals and what it does to everybody's thinking as much as it is the actual, how much am I going to pay for X, Y, and Z? And I'd love to get your opinion. It seems to me that for the last 6 months, it's just been a lot of uncertainty, and everybody who is uncertain winds up, hoping for the best and planning for the worst, and then a lot of bad decisions get made. So what's your take on what does this do? Is this just going to take everybody's temperature down?
Yeah, I think first off, people have to know what to believe. And when things like this come up, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation. Is this something that's going to go through? Will it fall through? There's just been so much talk going on. And then once it's determined, okay, yes, this is something I have to move through, there comes the question of, what does this look like? Are we managing our supply? How are we going to manage the tariffs? What programs are we using? What's our platform for managing supply chain? And then in amidst that, when you think about cybersecurity, who's thinking about the risk? And there's research and data that shows that cyber terrorism, this is the kind of environment that can be rife for that because it's a little bit chaotic, and companies are trying to figure out, what does this mean for them? Does it mean something? Is this really what's going to happen? Is this what it looks like? And then what's the process for going through that and going through that securely and responsibly? And I think it poses a lot of questions. At any time there's questions, doubt, and uncertainty within a business environment, there's always ripples and effect that we all feel from that. So I think when the news came out, I know for me personally, the first question was like, okay, is this real? Are we really doing this? What's going on? And it was hard, as I'm reading the articles and I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, what is the opinion? What is the thought? If this is something that's real, what direction are we going in? So in this environment, which it's like getting this sort of news, one would be wondering, how are we going to do this? Then add it to the climate that we're in and everything. It's like, okay, what does this look like in reality for us? And then how do we do this securely and responsibly? A lot of questions get asked. And again, with that doubt and uncertainty that can have ripples and effects for everybody.
I don't think it matters much. This is, I guess, I don't really buy rare earth minerals personally, but I do buy plastic things. I buy clothing, and I don't think that this is going to have much of an impact on the day-to-day spend of most Americans. Now, that being said, it's great that the rare earth mineral, export agreement is in place. We need it for our defense. I guess we need it for probably computers and phones. But for the most part, this is not going to impact everybody. Americans going to Target and Walmart.
Yeah. So, Mike, when I first saw the headline that we had a trade deal done with China, silly me, I thought we really had a trade deal done with China. What we really, and I've read it now across a half a dozen different sources. What it seems to me is this is nothing more than the Chinese have been kind enough to allow us to spend our money buying their rare earth minerals and keep us on the heroin that is our dependency on China for these minerals. And sometimes you got to pull the Band-Aid off and just go cold turkey to get the monkey off your back. We need we need alternative sources for these rare earth minerals. I used to think when I first heard about the rare earth mineral thing that, wow, China must be blessed that all these rare earth minerals happen to be in China. Well, no, they're not all in China. But what China's done is they've gone out and financed and entered into agreements with countries and areas where rare earth minerals are, such as uh, the African Republic of Congo and so forth, and Brazil and everywhere else, where they basically have the monopoly to get the rare earth minerals where they are, bring them into China for processing, and then export them at a very high profit. It's good business to dupes like the U.S. who are just going to, stay on the heroin. And what did we give up for getting this right to continue spending a lot of money on rare earth minerals through China? Well, we've lowered our tariffs and opened up some forbidden technology that we weren't going to give them. The tariffs are still very high, and they're mutually high, right? Going back and forth. Our coming into the U.S. is higher than going into China. But really, what do we really want in a China trade pact? We want access to Chinese markets. They've got 1.5 billion people. We want to be able to sell our products in there. We want protection for our IP, right? If things are going to be made in China, we don't want to see knockoffs of it before it even gets across the ocean in the shipping container, right? We want protections of our IP. Those are the things that I want in a China deal. This very much to me sounded as a preamble deal, but it really doesn't get to the crux of what we need from a China trade policy.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up what chapter in Art of the Deal that this actually goes with, and it doesn't seem to line up at all.
I, there's a long-term strategic aspect of it and a short-term aspect of it, right? And I think the what we've given up, you're right, Alan, and we've given up a lot for a short-term gain. And the real question is, what's the U.S. going to do in the long term? The U.S. itself is sitting on millions of metric tons of rare earth minerals that we are not getting right now for a variety of both economic and political reasons. And we've just discovered what is believed to be over 1 billion metric tons of additional rare earth deposits throughout the country. And I think we're sort of now where we are with fracking in oil, where if we invest the right amount of know-how and dollars, we can get access to huge deposits that we didn't think exist anymore, that we didn't think exist, right? And that could change the game. So it's a question of, what do you do between now and opening up the U.S. ability to manufacture, and how long does it take us to do that investment, get the know-how, and start producing and become self-sufficient rather than relying on China?
Well, I'm a San Bernardino girl. I was born and raised in San Bernardino, California, and we have the Mountain Pass mine. And most of what they pull out of that Mountain Pass mine goes to China for processing. It's one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals in the world. And we send it to China for processing. So I think Alan's onto something. It shouldn't be a Chinese trade deal. It should be a new way forward for processing these rare earth minerals, because we have them here. We're just not processing. I think China processes probably close to 80 or 90% of the rare earth minerals that we send over there. So from a perspective of looking at the hood, we have in San Bernardino, in that county, we have pushed for processing for a very long time. And I think Texas actually is starting to, I think the DOD put some money into some processing plants in Texas to address this.
This is an old from an old playbook. The British, this is what made Victoria great, right? They would import raw materials from throughout the empire, from the U.S. and Canada, North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and they would turn those raw materials into finished products, flax, cloth, or timber into ships, and steel and iron and sold it at huge markups. And that's what made the British Empire what it was.
The word you're looking for is mercantilism.
Okay, mercantile.
If I'm a business owner, what I'm thinking is I'm thinking, okay, there's this deal, there's the specifics of this deal, but what does this mean for China and U.S. relations? And I think, Jack, so you're saying like there's the short term and then the long term. And is this the beginning of a better trade deal, of other opportunities that we can then build upon? Is this the start of something that we can agree on, or is this just kind of a one-off short-term solution to address a short-term issue or placate demands?
Well, one of the things that Alan said was about intellectual property protection, right? And if China is taking raw materials and processing them, giving back essentially another form of raw materials, there's not a lot of intellectual property there, right? We know how to do that as well. We're just choosing not to do it for a variety of, right, mostly economic and regulatory reasons. But if we manufacture other goods like chips or clothing or designs, those designs, that intellectual property is where we end up losing big time when the Chinese Communist Party doesn't have the concept of intellectual property. Everything belongs to the state, right? So if we bring those types of manufacturing back to the United States, which is what we're starting to do, we protect that intellectual property. And that's, I think, very good for the United States in the long run. I also believe we should do the raw materials processing here, but I think the intellectual property theft part of it is less risky.
And I don't think there was anything in this agreement. In fact, this is only temporary, right? It's only 90 days. We have to have a discussion again in 90 days in September. So we'll see what happens.
This is the MO here of the administration, right? They're long on PR and short on substance. We were supposed to have 90 deals in 90 days. We've got one with the UK, which is kind of like kissing your sister, or your cousin or whatever. So they had to have another deal. So they're touting this as a deal.
All right. So in the next election cycle, though, the phrase "drill, baby, drill" will be replaced by "mine, baby, mine," right?
Possibly. They've been saying that in California for a long time.
It's process, baby.
Processing.
That's
We're mining. We're just not processing.
Right. That's where the issue is. But let's also that they also teased a huge deal on the books, maybe with India, and then if everyone else doesn't line up, we're just going to send letters and put them in buckets. Something like that was the quote. And taco. That's all. Taco. We'll see how this goes.
I don't know. I'm waiting to see what the EU does with China, because it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out around the world, because, there are other trade deals out there that can impact us.
And keep in mind, this does not impact most American consumers. This is not going to make things cheaper.
Not directly, but I think there's that misinformation, disinformation impact that in that way it affects people, the frustration, the tension. Like it's not as tangible as, okay, I'm pulling out my wallet doing it, but like we're absorbing all of this negative energy. And even if we're looking at this and saying, okay, my business isn't impacted by minerals and whatnot, and you're still asking that question of like, what's going to happen? Where are we going to go with this? And that's creating so much anxiety and risk because we don't know what's going on and we don't like sitting in uncertainty. That's not how we're built.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. This, of course, we recorded this on Friday. The whole thing may blow up by the time you're watching this on Monday. We'll see where it goes. Let's take a break here on Tech Strong Gang. We're going to come back, and I'm going to give a report about what I did on my summer vacation in New York City this week. You're watching Tech Strong Gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top quality leads. With us, You'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back and we're talking about platform engineering, and specifically there was an event in New York last week called Platform Con New York City, I think, and I think there's also ones in other places around the world, but Alan went to the one in New York City, and I don't know how many folks showed up there, Alan, but give us a report, give your take on what's going on here, because inquiring minds want to know what the heck's going on with platform engineering.
Absolutely. Well, I'll mention as I think it'll be in the bottom here. I wrote a nice article on my experience at Platform Con New York in person. Now, Mike, what it is this is, I believe, the third year for Platform Con. And it went from, I think, around 10,000 people the first year, 25,000 the second year, to perhaps 40,000 people year three. Now, that is a virtual event. So anyone can register and log in, and they have, I forget, it was 80 sessions, 100 sessions. It's been going on all week, Monday, and it wraps up Friday. Friday morning it wrapped up. What they did this year for the first time is they did some in-person, so sort of a hybrid event, if you will, some in-person in London and New York. The one here in New York was at the Convention or Conference Center. They had about 400 people. It was sold out. They couldn't fit anymore. 400 people was a great turnout. Some of these, all of the sessions here were then beamed live to the entire virtual event audience. The highlights of the session is that Kelsey Hightower, former Google, everybody I think in the cloud native space has heard of Kelsey. Kelsey's a real champion for platform engineering. He keynoted last year's event, keynoted this year's event. He had some very interesting takes. If I could sum it up, though, he's bullish on platform engineering. He thinks it solves a lot of what we've got wrong in our development and deployment scenarios and security as well. And it was interesting. His daughter actually was in the audience, and she asked a question. I didn't put this in the article, but his daughter was in the audience. She asked a question, and it got Kelsey, I guess, right between the eyes. It made him shed a tear or two. There was a moment for him. So I was happy for Kelsey. They had some other great speakers, though. We had Google, and it was interesting. They had a gal from Google who's in charge of the product of their internal development developer platform, their IDP, because everyone in Google, and they've been using an IDP for many, many years. Now that actually runs on Google Cloud, obviously. But Google Cloud runs on Google. So it's a very, incestuous relationship, if you will. But it was a great insight into how Google is doing platform engineering in their IDP. I also had a chance to speak to folks from ThoughtWorks, Grok, a bunch of different companies, large and small. But the biggest thing was the enthusiasm of the participants. This is a practitioner event. It was 400, standing room only people there. The conversations outside of the sessions were amazing. The platformengineering.org community rolled out certification classes now for platform engineering. It kind of reminded me of my DevOps Institute days. Those courses were packed. They had some great hands-on workshops for practitioners that were also packed. Lot of great communication. It was, look, platform engineering's real. It's arrived. They've got big companies, big and small, kind of, touting it. And it was a great event. I would imagine next year you're going to see more in person. It'll still be hybrid, but they may go to more cities and they may have bigger London, from what I understand, was a bigger venue. It was not sold out as the New York one was, close to sold out, and also that same sort of vibe and energy. So I'm bullish on platform engineering.
Hey, Alan, what did the demographics look like? What was the age groups?
I felt old. Um, so again, it was a practitioner event, though there were plenty of execs there and managers and so forth. But I would say overall, it was, 20s and 30 somethings with a sprinkling of 40, 50s and mores.
Yeah, well, I was at CDCon and I felt young.
Really? Well, and that might say something right there, Chase.
You know what? I know. That's why I asked the question. And we were, I thought that the group was, represented DevOps 15 years ago, and they're not changing much. So I think platform engineering is going to kind of sweep them off their feet.
Did you notice the types of attendees, whether they were from larger companies or smaller companies?
That's what got me. Both, because platform engineering is something that you really need when you're scaling, right? When you scale, and so it tends to lend itself to larger organizations. And don't get me wrong, there were a lot of people from household name kind of companies. But there were also, the usual startups and smaller companies that are, staying on cutting edge of technology.
If you had to sum it up in like one sentence, what's your key takeaway from PlatformCon?
Platform engineering is real. And obviously people want to know that this is a real problem and they're looking for solutions. And these platform engineering seems to be offering them the solutions they're looking for.
What type of topics were there? Did they have any topics on security?
Yeah, they had some security, not enough. In the article, in my predictions for next year's PlatformCon, I predicted that they'll have a whole track on security because it's too important not to.
I guess, one of the things that I'm still wrestling with is, are we seeing jobs posted for platform engineers, or is this something that software engineers or a subset of them do as a practice per se, and it's a best practice, but it's not my job title?
No, so a platform engineer is an in-demand job title, and we've done stories on this, Mike, that on whole, they actually make more money than DevOps engineers. But here's an interesting thing. I spoke to this woman, Camille Fournier, who just wrote an O'Reilly book on platform engineering. And then I spoke to one or two other folks who have been around. They weren't the young people at the show. Let's put it that way. They've been around. And what they told me, they all said the same thing. They've been managing platforms for 20 plus years. I spoke to the SVP of a company. Darn if I remember the company's name. Her name is Srithi. Tell something. Anyway, she had been at Yahoo and she's been at HashiCorp and others. But all of those people, similar story. They've been managing platforms for 20 years. We, in the IT industry, have had platforms all along. We just, the idea of, putting the name platform engineering on it and calling these people platform engineers, when you go underneath that umbrella, there's a lot of different disciplines that go into designing and managing, running that platform.
I would say that we've had platforms, but not engineering, because every platform's a snowflake in these operations, and they're all somewhat different and tweaked, and even multiple instances of Kubernetes are not the same. So that's kind of makes the whole issue difficult to scale.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think a big part of what this community is trying to get like best practices in place. And you know, interesting, you mentioned Kubernetes. I think another thing that I heard there yesterday is the platform engineering is maturing. It used to be, all right, let's install Kubernetes. Okay, we've got our platform, we'll move on. But, you know, now we're looking at IDPs, we're looking at security, you know, looking at a lot of other things that go beyond just setting up and installing Kubernetes.
Alan, what's for the neophytes who are not platform engineers, what's IDP?
Internal developer platform. So, you know, a Google creates an IDP for all the Google developers to use.
So I'm kind of smiling to myself that Kelsey Hightower keynoted this thing, because I cannot tell you how many keynotes I've been to over the years with Kelsey, and he's always standing up there saying Kubernetes is easy, and everybody in the room goes, "What's that guy talking about? Kubernetes is not." And so I feel like maybe this is, you know, going to be Kubernetes 2.0, where we're going to finally get it right and call it platform engineering and make it easier.
You mean it goes beyond Fippy goes to the zoo?
We will see. We will see what happens. But Kelsey's definitely bullish on it. So anyway, that's my report.
All right, folks. Well, any final parting phrases, thoughts on this, Alan, before we move on to our next?
I mean, you know, we will have, in addition to that article I wrote, we did a whole bunch of videos, though they streamed live from the show yesterday. And actually by today, they'll probably be up on techstrong.tv or our OTT app. So you can check them out there. And, you know, log into platformengineering.com, because that's where we're going to be, you know, putting more and more of this platform engineering centric news. And
there wasn't any big announcements when any, you know, was there any interesting tooling announced?
It's not that kind of it's not that kind of conference, right? It's not a single vendor. It's really not. It's a community led kind of thing. And it hasn't matured to the point, let's say at KubeCon, where all these companies, you know, release their latest versions for KubeCon or something like that. It's still very much more of defining best practices, community. It reminds me of early DevOps, like DevOps days when that was really rocking.
It's group therapy, right?
Yeah, there is a certain amount of that. Anyway, let's take a break. We'll come back. We've got our third segment lined up. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey folks, we're back, and under the heading of Curiouser and Curiouser, the U.S. House of Representatives has banned the usage of WhatsApp. Not quite clear why, but they're saying apparently there's not enough transparency in how WhatsApp works or what's going on. This is from the same people who seem to be using, you know, Signal left, right, and center, but it's a little perplexing at the very least. But Jack, what's your take on what's going on here?
Well, I'm going to steal a line from Stacy and say this is a little bit of misinformation, disinformation, and head scratching all at once. What I understand is they're claiming that there are data security issues, and it was banned by the House Chief Information Officer. So let's just start with good thing that the House has a CIO, a role I don't think anybody knew existed. That they're considering the security aspects of the tools they're using is absolutely wonderful. Makes my heart go pitter patter. but there are a number of tools that are available that they can use for communication that spans Signal, Microsoft Teams, even Amazon has a tool. Again, another one I didn't know, Wicker, that is on the approved list. All of the tools that are approved and WhatsApp all support end-to-end encryption. So that's a really good security feature. Apparently, WhatsApp by default does not encrypt the data once it lands on your device. And that is an option that you have to enable. So that may be the sticking point. It's not clear. All of the other tools encrypt the data as it lands on your device. So when it's at rest, it's still encrypted, and you have to authenticate to the device before you can get access to that data. The other part that may come into play here is that there is a way to share to link your WhatsApp stuff with the rest of your Meta applications, Facebook, Instagram, some of the others. And that may be part of, it's not clear if that's the issue or not, but that may be part of the sticking point, that by connecting those apps to your Facebook app, there's some leakage in that can occur there, as well as Facebook and or Meta now plans on and has released its first ads and is putting ads into the WhatsApp platform. So all of that may come to bite Meta in the long run and WhatsApp in the long run in terms of its usage.
So, Stacy, is it your sense that this is something other enterprises should be looking at and say, hey, if the CIO of the House of Representatives has an issue, maybe we should all have an issue?
Possibly. I mean, it kind of gets into everything is just so chaotic. How does anybody know what to believe? Sometimes I feel it's like that. I forget what movie it is, but that's, a bunch of movies where it's like, hey, look over there. Something gets taken from your plate. Like, I can't tell. And, I mean, it's interesting that they're touting and looking at this WhatsApp when meanwhile, everything that's been going on with Signal, is it a decoy? Like, what is going on, right? These are all the questions that people are asking and trying to figure out. So I think regardless, it's important for all organizations to be looking at, what programs are being used, what's going on with the data. I think about how last week we were talking about the EU and their high standards and expectations for how data is managed, right? And the fact that they are uncomfortable with the US managing their data. So I almost feel like there's a little bit of a parallel. We're looking at this, it's not another country, but we're saying, okay, Meta, we're not comfortable with you having the data. So what are we doing? And that's the big question that I think every organization may be asking, or if they're listening and watching would be asking, and trying to look at their policies and trying to look at what makes sense and to try and keep up as best that they can. But again, I think we need to see where we land. Where are we next week and the week after? And to just try and keep on top and keep as informed as possible about what's going on, because there is a lot that's going on. There's a lot of things that are changing and moving very quickly.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the UK because the UK in the past has flirted with, the EU in the past has flirted with this, and the UK is currently contemplating requiring people to break encryption to provide a backdoor for the government. And so anything that's end-to-end encrypted where the service provider doesn't have access to the encryption keys would not be legal in the UK. And eventually the EU has mentioned that they'd like to go that way various times in the past. So that would mean all of these apps wouldn't be valid in those regions. And it's sort of, there's this schizophrenic or bimodal view of security, which is we want no sharing of personal data unless the government gets access to it, right? And I guess I'm glad that the United States hasn't gone that far, and that the House isn't saying, oh, well, we don't have access to the encryption keys, therefore it's not good. They're actually saying it's not secure enough rather than it's too secure.
And I wonder how much of this has to do with tracking this information through the National Archives, because my understanding with these apps, an individual would have to archive it for them. It's not something that's done automatically. So that seems to be I don't know the space at all, but to me, that seems to be a gap in these types of tools. Unlike email servers, right? Exactly.
I wasn't going to go there, Mike, but I will say that both WhatsApp and Signal support time limited messages, so they disappear after a certain amount of time. Um, Microsoft Teams, which is on the approved list, would presumably, and I'm not an expert in that space, but I assume that since it's part of the whole Microsoft ecosystem, would actually be able to archive the messages in a secure fashion. I don't know about Wicker or some of the others, but I think, Tracy, that the disappearing aspect of messages is concerning for things that are conducted on government business. You do want to retain that.
Yeah. So, and there are rules for how long those things should be retained. I've always thought that the connection between Instagram and Facebook created potential security issues because you can't, like, it's very hard to stop. If I post it on one, does it show up on the other? I thought they kept WhatsApp purposely sort of isolated from the Facebook infrastructure and all of that for the very reason you brought up, Jack, or the very reason that the CIO brought up.
Right. Well, it's my understanding is that by default it's not integrated. So if you create an Instagram account, essentially it's part of Facebook. If you create whatever their I can't remember what they call it, their
Threads.
competitor Threads.
Threads.
Thank you. Their competitor Twitter, Threads. If you create a Threads account, it's automatically integrated with your Facebook and your Instagram. WhatsApp is kept separate, but there is still a way to connect it, and I think people do because there's from being part of a greater platform and having all your things talk to each other. I think a lot of people find it useful to connect them all together.
I mean, if that's the case, valid concerns. I wish they'd be a little bit more consistent, across them all, but
it'd also be nice if they got more specific in what the lack of transparency. Their statement was there's a lack of transparency in the security, and I'd like to understand, what they mean by that. What is the actual concerns from the CIO, and is there an opportunity for Meta to to address those concerns and get back in, or are they basically just saying that's it, you're out?
I have when I think about, they're using Signal, but they're not using WhatsApp. So why? Right? And I believe that WhatsApp collects a lot of metadata because I think that they want, Meta wants that. But I don't think Signal collects that much. So it almost feels to me it would be the opposite. WhatsApp's going to say who you messaged, where you messaged, and I think you can archive that data off. But Signal, I don't think Signal collects much of anything. And is that the issue here? They don't want that kind of information traced anymore? That's why I was asking about the National Archives, because it seems to me it's the opposite. Seems to me WhatsApp would be easier to archive than Signal.
Well, it could be the metadata, and it could also be the potential to abuse the metadata or whatever ad data they do have access to for profit or for throughout the Meta universe. Whereas if you're on Signal or if you're part of all of the Office, the Microsoft Teams is part of Office 365, it's part of FedRAMP, so all of that is in a walled garden. It doesn't get shared. A Signal is obviously Signal's like a nonprofit. It doesn't share with anybody. It's not trying to make money off of this stuff. I don't know the answer for Wicker, Amazon's tool, and the other ones that are approved is Apple's iMessage and FaceTime. But those are also essentially walled gardens. Apple doesn't share that information with anybody else, doesn't sell it either. It's really only Facebook that's ever been in the position of saying, well, you give us access to, we basically will take everything we can and leverage it and use it to sell ads against you and to do other things with it.
Right. So I feel like that's kind of the core of the problem here for WhatsApp, right? Because they're providing quite a bit of detail about all those government officials, and Facebook owns it.
I guess, what I want to know is like how much potential shadow IT is going on in Congress and the government in general, whether they have these quote unquote approved apps, but I got a feeling that a lot of them are probably communicating on things that are not quote unquote approved. And
But that's not new. I mean, Mike, you brought up Hillary's emails. That's the perfect example, but it wasn't just Hillary. They've all, what about cell phones? What about your cell phones? Are they using, lockdown cell phones? Are they using burner phones? Are they, there's all kinds of craziness going on.
So let's also be clear here that the ban was on government issued devices, right? Now, almost all of the members of the House and their staff are going to have a government issued device for government work and then a personal device for their personal stuff. And will they use the personal device for government work? Even if by accident, which I'm sure anybody who's ever been issued multiple devices, a business device and a personal device, has almost always used the wrong device because it's just a pain in the ass, right? It's a pain in the tuchus to deal with that. So yeah, inadvertently, you're going to end up using shadow IT, personal device to do government business. Do some people do it purposefully? I'm sure.
It is what it is.
Well, it feels like to me that this is a discussion about the government's lag in terms of adopting new technology and adjusting to how we now communicate. And maybe the government should have their own version of a signal where we can track, the data that's coming from them, so the National Archives can have a look at it, or at least, track it. And that's what they're there for. And we're not doing that with these new solutions. And everybody has a phone, and everybody's going to use their own phone. It's just the way we are. So how does government catch up with that?
Well,
We have a long way to go.
There's always a lag between technology and then legislature and like society catching up to it. And and the government, at some level, we think we hold to a higher standard because they need to have, the security. I don't want to use the word secrecy, but there's definitely a lag, and technology's moving forward at such a rapid pace.
Well, in this case, I don't really think there's a lag. If you think about it, they've given the House members options for 7 or 8 different communications channels. Now, in the technology world, we talk very often about, meeting the customers where they are. And I believe that. And I've got, I don't know how many different communications channels I use on a daily basis, simultaneously having communicate right with Slack and Teams and Signal and WhatsApp and email and it goes on. And, so, it's because I can't dictate to the people I interact with what tools they use. Right. And if you're a House member and your constituency or somebody very important reaches out to you on a particular communications channel, do you tell them, no, I can't talk to you on this, you must talk to me on some other channel? Or do you have the conversation you need to have?
If it's top secret, you tell them it has to be done on another channel. Thank you very much. Yes.
Well, for top secret,
that's what
for
you
classified
do.
stuff,
Yes.
I mean, that's a whole nother story. But most House members aren't dealing with classified stuff on their day-to-day basis, right? They're dealing with just generic issues that for the most part end up in the public because that's their job, is to be in the public.
I think that now that we know that there's an actual CIO for the House, and I'm assuming there's one for the Senate, maybe somebody should invite these folks to a hearing and ask some interesting questions.
I would love that. That'd be great. Let's do it.
I would love that too. Great
Yes.
suggestion, Mike.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, let's wrap up this episode of Tech Strong Gang. Tracy, Stacy, Jack, Mike, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. As usual, we have our Tech Strong TV schedule right behind this. We'll be back tomorrow with fresh content. Until then, take care, everybody. We're out.